Say when.
When? Welcome to Asian Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. Before I introduce our guest today, who really doesn't need much introduction, I'd like to just take a moment to express the condolences of those of us here at Asian Review about the untimely death of UH Professor of Law John Van Dyke. Professor Van Dyke died in his sleep while attending a conference in Australia. We are fortunate enough to have had him join us for one episode of Asian Review and bring us up to speed on the situation in the South China Sea. So our condolences go out to his family, and we know his colleagues at the law school will also feel the loss. Well, as I said, our guest today really doesn't need a whole lot of introduction. Yes, it's Ed Case, candidate for the U.S. Senate. Ed is a Hilo boy. He attended Hastings School of Law, College of Law, and returned to Hawaii to practice law, later served in the Hawaii State House of Representatives, and then went on to the U.S. Congress. He is again practicing law, but as everyone knows, is campaigning for the Senate seat to be vacated by Senator Akaka at the end of his current term. Ed frequently attends Pacific Forum events and expresses his interest in Asian affairs. He's visited Asia numerous times as a member of a congressional delegation, on business or for pleasure. And he serves on the annual Australian American Leadership Dialogue held at the East-West Center. His son, in fact, is carrying on the tradition and now, as we speak, is teaching in Japan. We ask him here today to discuss his view of Asian affairs and tell us something about how issues related to Asia are worked through Congress. Welcome to Asian Review.
It's good to be with you. Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. It's great to have you. Oh, where do we start? APEC. I suppose that's a logical place to start and the most current event. What was your take on APEC?
I thought it was a tremendous success. You know, I listened really to the some of the discussion in the media and you know, out among Hawaii's folks about APEC, and whenever I heard somebody questioning the value of APEC to Hawaii, our country, or the world, I thought, boy, I sure don't agree with that. You know, I don't think, first of all, just from a perspective of Hawaii, to put on a world-class, a world importance kind of a conference like that with heads of state from throughout the world, couldn't have been a better opportunity for us to showcase ourselves. And you know, we need to realize that the pure public relations value of that was invaluable. From the perspective of our country focusing on the Asia-Pacific region, which I think is not only the way of our present but the way of our future. Absolutely the right focus for us right here in Hawaii in terms of us being a bridge between East and West, which we've talked about for a long, long time. And,
years, it seems.
Drifted on from year to year, but it's really inevitable that is our place in the future.
Okay, so you feel that it was successful for the U.S. and successful for Hawaii as well. And I suppose it's too early to tell, just so shortly after APEC, but are we going to become that, as you suggested, that bridge between the mainland and Asia? Is this finally going to happen?
Well, I think you know, of course, I was born and raised in Hawaii, and I remember decades ago when we were talking about being a transportation hub. That was really what we were trying to be at the time. You know, airlines were going to land here, and people were going to spend some time here.
Pan Am landed
in Koala
Basin.
Yeah. No, I wasn't alive then. You know.
Okay, I didn't want to date you, so I take that back.
Yeah, I was hardly alive when Pan Am was really pumping. Although my wife is a flight attendant, and she started with Pan American.
Is that right?
Yeah, she flew around the world on, you know, whatever it was, Flight 1 for many years. You know, I think that that's a matter of choice for us, really. I think that we have underestimated our potential and our capabilities to really be that bridge between East and West here. We have fine institutions here. We have the East-West Center. We have a number of other institutions that focus in quite a quiet and almost secret sometimes way in terms of being what we always envisioned for ourselves in the Asia Pacific. Of course, the institution in Hawaii that is the most involved in the Asia Pacific is our military and PACOM, Center of the Pacific Command. And I think, you know, I didn't realize until I went to Congress exactly how much was done right here in Hawaii from an Asia Pacific perspective for our country and for our world, really, through focusing through PACOM.
Yeah.
And so the institutions are there, the experience is there, but we do have some choices at both the state and the national level to make. We can choose to be, a backwater and get out of the way and let somebody else do it for us, or we can choose to take advantage of our potential and our situation and go out there and invest in that kind of infrastructure, invest in that kind of training, invest in that kind of those kinds of relationships.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a minute. Is, what you said is, I think, all well and true. But on the other hand, isn't Hawaii a rather inward-looking state that mitigates against that desire or motivation to create connections east and west?
I think it is true that too much of our political culture here has been resistant to change, has been resistant to seizing the opportunity, has been resistant to really aggressively moving forward and grabbing the moment. We tend to underestimate ourselves. John Burns said that decades ago, and other people have said it since, and I believe it. We tend to believe that we are not as good as we absolutely are, that we do not have the same potentials that we absolutely do, and that we cannot do certain things that we absolutely can go out there and do. And so, yes, we are fighting many times our own institutional feeling that perhaps we don't have the ability to do that. And that's part of the basic decision that right here in Hawaii we have to make in the next couple of decades.
This thing about the bridge, I'm really going to sound like I'm the devil's advocate here, but I've heard so many people talk about this for so long. Governor Burns, I think, was the first one that talked about it. Pat Psyche talked about it. Linda Lingle talked about it. Innumerable other people talked about it, but never seemed to quite be able to pull it off. What do you think, if you haven't mentioned already, or some of the hurdles to that we just haven't been able to get over?
We have the ingredients together, but that kind of thing takes critical mass. You've got to add a couple of things together, and for a long time, it's not as if you're making any progress, and then all of a sudden you have some kind of critical mass, and the reaction takes off, to use that analogy, and we haven't quite gotten there. Like I said, we've got the first thing we have is a place that people want to come to. So let's focus on the obvious here.
There's no doubt about
folks
that.
from Asia. We are where folks from Asia want to come. They want to spend time here. They want to get their health needs addressed here. They want to be educated here. They want to have business relationships here and do deals here and conferences here and all that kind of stuff. So we've got a natural advantage because they don't want to go to some other places that may have a better geographic.
Right.
I mean, in all due respect, for example, and I'm going to get myself in big trouble here, but to Guam. Which has many of those ingredients they don't want to go to.
We like people on the show who are willing to stick their necks out, by the way.
I really apologize because I do have friends in Guam, but I mean it's an example. So the fact that we have a built-in advantage of our geography, of our culture, of a familiarity that people have is the best starting point of all. Then we've got the military, and I talked about the military earlier, and of course the military is quite interested nowadays in public-private partnerships. May not have felt that way when I was growing up, when there was like this huge Berlin Wall between the military and the rest of Hawaii. That's been broken down in the last couple of decades. They can work with the University of Hawaii. We've developed schools of excellence at the University of Hawaii, not just at the East-West Center, to provide that kind of critical mass. So it's just a matter of, to me, it's just continue to add to that. And you can't micromanage it. It needs to take off on its own at some point.
Well, okay, let me ask you this now. Okay, you served in the State House for a long period of time, and you served in Congress. Does the Hawaii State Senate, Hawaii State House, do they really push this bridge concept, or are they more of an impediment? And how about the congressional delegation? Did they really push it? Or not?
It's really a mixed answer. In all honesty, I think it is probably fair to say that the comments I made earlier about the political culture of Hawaii are relatively accurate in terms of the state legislature. After all, that is the political culture, or a large part of the political culture, and they tend to be very focused on kind of a very a more insular view of the issues that they face. The issues that you face in the state legislature are: how are you going to balance the budget for next year? And what are you going to do about the next union negotiation and funding the union negotiation? And what are you going to do about the environmental situation over on Maui or something like that. And so it does not tend to lend it. And also, state legislators, of course, are part-time legislators. They serve for 4 months a year. And so they come into session, it's a whip all the way through that. And they really don't have time or even the inclination to focus on kind of international relations and how to build up Hawaii from the quote-unquote bridge direction, or to really think creatively and forward-looking on how to position ourselves to keep up with the advancements in Asia and in the United States. That really is something that the governor is much more appropriate to do. And some governors have focused there and some, frankly, haven't. And
Well,
so,
I think in defense of the state legislatures, at least the members of the House, probably would be fair to say, yes, they have to worry about re-election every 2 years too. And that cycle goes pretty fast, it seems to me.
nowadays, 2 years and 4 years and 6 years all go very, very fast in politics. So no, I don't want to downplay, because there are many state legislators very much focused on trying to develop Hawaii from an economic development potential in terms of the relationship with Asia. It's just not part of, it's not like you're on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee thinking about this stuff all the time.
Right.
You know.
Gene Ward, I don't know if you happen to have seen it, but I guess it was about 10 days ago, he did a very interesting op-ed in the Star Advertiser talking about, well, you know, it's time to bring back the State Office of International Relations. It's time to really rev up the state's, you know, role or participation in international affairs. And what's your take on that?
I think it's an absolutely essential part of our state government, especially if we want to go down this road and actually start to realize some of that potential. You need a state partner. You need somebody in the state government that is actually coordinating things from the Hawaii government perspective. The county governments do a little bit of it, but they're simply, that's just not really their job profile.
They do this, the city to city relations,
city to city, county to
sister
county,
relationships.
all of which is valuable, and they operate very well collectively with the governor and the legislature when they're all on the same page. But if you're really looking for the leader in the state in terms of fostering our position in the Asia Pacific region going forward, it's in the governor's office. That's really where you're going to have the best ability and the responsibility, and it's hard to do if you don't have one or two people that are absolutely focused on that particular goal. And going around and just, you know, cracking the whip and saying, no, let's go back and work on this. So, you know, Gene is one of those folks in the legislature that you know, absolutely cares about this stuff. Goes back to his Peace Corps experience. Has been a very consistent advocate for this for decades.
Right. Well, let's move back maybe a step here. What's your overall take on U.S.-Asia policy?
My overall take on it is that it is moving forward with tremendous challenges and with choices to be made. I think that would be the best way for me to describe it. I don't think that we are stagnant in terms of our U.S.-Asia policy. I think President Obama's reported shift over to focus on Asia was exactly the right thing to do.
Pivoting towards Asia?
Pivoting towards
Asia. That's
Asia.
the new buzzword, I think.
Yeah, I think that, and so there are, of course, very promising developments in Myanmar and other countries in Asia, and I think that I like the overall directions that we've taken in Asia back over about the last 10 years or so. And so I'm not, being partisan about this.
Sure.
I think that one thing you discover is that when you get on the inside of it is that in many ways the partisan divide and partisan politics that we've seen in this country tends to rotate around domestic policy, at least of late, rather than foreign policy. And I have not really seen a substantial change in our Asia policy over some time now. And if you talk to the folks in PACOM, or actually you mentioned the Australian-American Leadership Dialogue that I participate in. If you go to the foreign countries and ask them, have they perceived a change in the United States' policy, they'll pretty much say, no, you guys have been pretty consistent. So
I think that's a view that folks that follow those sorts of issues generally held, is the United States never really bowed out of Asia. Maybe there was the rise of China that made it look that way, but we were always there. And it seems, according to President Obama and Secretary Clinton, we're going to be even more there, ever more present. But, sometimes I wonder, the way this has been parsed in the press is, well, the U.S. is pivoting towards Asia, and that sounds good to me. And it's sort of the suggestion is we're sort of going to leave the Middle East behind. But I wonder how realistic that is. I don't think we can leave the Middle East behind. We have too many interests there as well.
Well, I think, our foreign policy for the last decade has clearly been distorted by Iraq and Afghanistan. And so, it wasn't as if we were functioning in a world in which everything was quote unquote equal. We had undertaken major obligations in Iraq and Afghanistan, which took the focus away from the rest of the world. But underneath Iraq and Afghanistan, you had a whole bunch of folks that were still working on Asia policy, still trying to move it forward. And of course, in the middle of all of this is the rise of China. I went into the U.S. Congress 9 years ago now, and I can tell you that the U.S. Congress 9 years ago on China and the U.S. Congress today, just in terms of general focus, general attention, even concern in some quarters, and looking at where in the world the foreign policy challenges and opportunities are, that 9 years is like night and day. So this is moving fast. Sometimes our foreign policy is accused of not being forward-thinking and getting ahead of the curve, and we're kind of getting pulled along with movements elsewhere in the world while we pretended that we're the only thing that counted in the world. But I think again, going back to your basic question, I think we have tried to be proactive in Asia. I think that we are generally making the right moves in Asia, and so I don't have a major disagreement with what we're doing in Asia. I think it's a very realistic assessment of what's going on in Asia right now.
Is U.S. policy China-driven, or is it more driven in a more multilateral type fashion?
Well, I'm sure that if you asked any foreign policy community person that was on the record, they would say multilateral. But let's face it, it is. The major choices are about China.
That's a really good answer.
They're about China. Yeah. I mean, the single biggest issue for our country, for the Asia-Pacific region, and for the world, the single biggest issue in the next 25 years, so this is a generational issue, is what is the relationship going to be between the United States and China? Which way is it going to go? And that's going to impact everything else. That's how important it is. So, of course we are going to discuss, and of course all of the other countries out there that we have relationships with that are our allies in the Asia-Pacific region, of course they all are crucial to us. But you asked me, where is it China-centric or not, and I'm going to say, wait, everything is evaluated against China nowadays, and it should be. That's how important China is. And by the way, India, which we can get to at some point.
Okay, sounds good. Well, is China then a threat or an opportunity?
We don't know. It can be both. That's a choice for us to make, and it's a choice for China to make too. And I think that's the biggest unknown in terms of our foreign policy today and our world today. And I think that it can go way north or way south, and that's the challenge for our country and for China too.
I think that is the big question that hovers over Washington and certainly other capitals of the world. What are China's intentions? And some of China's behavior in the last couple of years has not been really reassuring.
I don't think there's any doubt about China's intentions. I mean, I don't buy the what's China want. China wants to be a world power. China feels it's entitled to be a world power. China probably is entitled to be a world power, given its immense population and resources and history. Of course they deserve to be a world power. What kind of world power is that going to be? Is that going to be an adverse world power, as in the USSR, or is it going to be a power for good that gets along with the rest of the world? They want to be a world power. And one thing about China, and again, I'm just Mr. Layman out there who happens to have dealt with China a little bit in my time. So I'm not the these guys that just talk in amazing foreign policy doublespeak all the time. So I'm just going to say what I think here.
There's people like that in every capital of the world.
I know. I love listening to them. I really love it because they just know so much, and they actually do know the names of every single president out there in the rest of the world. I don't, but sometimes I listen and I wait. Okay, let's get back to the basics here. I think that One of the problems that we have in this country, and certainly a problem that I saw in Congress, is we tend to, when we're interpreting China, or any other country for that matter, we have a tendency to project our values to that interpretation.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right.
And so, when China is sitting there doing this or that, we say, that's the wrong thing to do, China. Well, that's not the way China's thinking about it. China's just trying to get from point A to point B, and they may not be applying the same values as we're applying.
Right. I think that's
one of the
clear.
challenges that we have with China is to have some agreement on a set of universal values that hopefully make sense from an economic perspective, from avoiding a conflict perspective. International trade would be a good example. Copyright infringement would be a good example. Currency manipulation would be. I could go right down the list.
Those are sort of the standard ones. Yeah. North Korea, Iran. Well, do you see China's rise as a peaceful one, or is it simply buying time until it has such an overwhelming amount of power it can pretty much get what it wants when it wants?
Well, I don't think that the latter is the case. China does not have the ability today to get what it wants when it wants.
Well, I mean, somewhere down the road.
I don't even think that that's a given. I think we tend to look at China and assume that because China, it's like the stock market. There's a famous saying in the stock market that just because stock traded a certain way doesn't mean it's going to trade that way in the future.
Right.
And just because China has had an incredible generation doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to have the next incredible generation. China has its own choices to make internally. Is it going to work for better income equality? How is it going to handle the fact that its success has been built on a growth economy, so that when it matures out, what's it going to do then? Is it going to have the structure and foundation of a country that will hold together like I think we did, because we had a good solid core. So we don't exactly know what China's going to look like. After all, it wasn't too many decades ago that we thought the USSR was going to go on forever, and that didn't happen. So China has its own choices to make. I don't think that I wouldn't say that I don't think that China's rise has been peaceful per se or aggressive per se. It's just been a rise.
Why is that?
Huh? Well, because of course China has wanted to build up its military power and exert its influence beyond its borders. From China's perspective, it's feeling, this incredible noose around itself that it feels it has to push back out away from its, and exert its quote unquote sphere of influence. And so that's not necessarily a peaceful exercise when you start trying to land on small islands and lay your claim to them. But on the other hand, it is not the situation either that for example, again going back to the USSR, that went out and invaded other countries outright to assert its own power. So it's been a middle ground, and it's been a very deliberate and just along the way middle ground.
Well, I think you suggested something really important, and it certainly will have an impact on whatever kind of power China is to be in the future, is their domestic situation, because the domestic situation seems to be at least somewhat deteriorating. More and more demonstrations, less exports, less demand for exports, and that's really been the essence of Chinese growth. In the current 5-year plan, there's all this talk about building up domestic demand to supplant exports, but I don't think anybody thinks that's really attainable. So China has some huge challenges.
Well, I think the biggest challenge China has, we can talk about the challenges of its economic model. We can talk about the challenges of its military projection and the risks that it takes in doing that. We can talk about a lot of things, but I think the basic challenge China has internally is that if you go to China and just talk to folks in China and you ask them, how do you feel about not being free? Which they're not. They have economic freedom, but that's about the only freedom they have there. They can't go on the internet and do whatever they want. They can't, celebrate the religion the way they want. All that kind of stuff's still true in China. And you ask them, how does that make you feel? And they will tell you pretty universally, we've made a basic deal with each other that we will we will hold those freedoms in abeyance while we get where we want to go collectively. But at some point, you run out of time and you want them.
Yeah, yeah.
You've given up, you've sacrificed enough, and you want what you see the rest of the world having. And can China make that transition then? Because I think at that point, it's either going to go towards deterioration, or it is going to loosen up, and it will hopefully. Yeah. And I do hope this, as a citizen of the world, it will blossom off into even a better country than where it's going right now.
Well, I think it's probably fair to say, though, that the degree of freedom that people have in today's China is far more than it was 20 years ago. And it seems to me, of course, if you say that Hu Jintao is a scoundrel and he should be offed, you're in big trouble. But other sorts of criticism, it seems like the government can tolerate as long as they don't get too out of hand. Yeah?
I don't know. I really want to go on the internet and see whatever I want to see.
Yeah, yeah.
I really want to go out there and say that I don't like my president. I want to do those things.
Some are willing to take that chance in China.
I think that I want to come from dire poverty in the country and be able to have a dream that I can, if I work hard, my kids will be successful. If I'm not successful, I don't think you can say that those things are true in China today. And it is all relative. And you're correct. They're better off than they were 20 years ago, but where does that get you?
Yeah.
It gets you to about 1/5 of the freedoms that we have today, and that's not enough.
I spent a lot of time in China last summer, and I found a lot of people that I talked to were pretty upset about the economic situation, and which is just not as good as it was.
Well, if you're on an 8 to 10% growth rate, and you're trying to maintain that in order to take care of all of those hundreds of millions of folks that are coming from the country to the city, and get them employed and get them working, and all of a sudden your growth rate stalls, and everything is built on the assumption of growth, you're going to run into some trouble because the expectations are not being met.
Right. Will Japan remain America's #1 ally in Asia?
I'm not sure I would. Actually, I guess I would question your basic assumption there.
Okay.
I mean, I think Japan is certainly one of our #1 allies in Asia, but I would certainly put Australia, for example, in the same league as with other countries, including some of our allies.
For example?
Thailand, New Zealand, countries that that we seem to be gravitating towards for various reasons. Vietnam would be an example of that. And they, of course, gravitating towards us as well. I think that'll take a generation or two. But I think the answer is yes. I think that they will continue let me put it this way. They're a little bit like Australia. They will continue to be. We have a deal. We will stay involved there, and so will they. And we will be partners. If we show hesitancy and say, no, we're gonna raise the gangplank and go focus on South America, and somehow this part of the world has gotten too tough for us, then what do you expect them to do?
Right.
I mean, we have the advantage of economies and distance from them, and market. Well, we do have an integrated market, obviously, but nothing like Japan today, or even Australia. Australia and China are, Australia is in the unusual situation of having its major economic partner, China, by far, be different from its ally.
I know. But that's a situation a lot of Asian countries are finding themselves in these days, isn't it?
Absolutely, and they want to be they welcome the economic benefits of trading with China, but they don't want to be dominated by China.
Right.
And that's their challenge. So I think that in that basic dynamic, as long as we stay involved, we will maintain our allies. We will be able to continue to realize our own economic benefits from trade with the Asia Pacific region, and everything will be good. But that's why I liked what Obama said, because every time we hiccup and look away from Asia Pacific, it causes a chain reaction in the Asia Pacific region among all those countries, and we don't want that.
And they're all of them always worried about the U.S. packing up and, what did you say, going to South America or some other place. it seems to be a constant fear that they have. Although it seems to me that the U.S. is an innumerable number of times tried to alleviate that fear, but it always seems to be some uncertainty.
Well, that's the problem with China's rise, because they are exerting a much greater influence economically, militarily, socially throughout Asia, and so that does create a nervousness among those countries. So of course they're going to react that way.
Right, right. Yeah. Tough question now. The Okinawa base situation is a real thorn in the side of Japanese-American relations. Now, I don't know if you might have dealt with that at all in the past.
Yeah.
Do you have a solution for that? What would your solution be?
I really think that the grand bargain that was struck and that I had hoped would be realized of a downsizing, but not a removal, not a departure from Okinawa, but a downsizing to address the legitimate concerns of Okinawans over one or two of the bases that were the most intrusive, right? So that force was relocated both to Japan, Honshu really, and Guam was the right solution. And I'm sorry that really, I think what really happened here was that, of course, Japan has been kind of a mess politically from a national leadership perspective for years now. And
It's
they haven't gotten
really
there.
a sad story.
And
isn't
so
it?
there has not been the leadership there to exert the view that from a national perspective, from a Japan perspective, from a long-term alliance perspective, this was in the best interest of Japan to do this deal, regardless of whether some folks didn't like it in Okinawa. So I'm sorry that they haven't gotten there. I hope they get there.
Now, I remember reading in your bio that while you were serving in Congress, you went, I guess it was on one, but very long congressional trip to Japan. Who did you meet during that time? What were the issues that the Japanese wanted to discuss? What were the issues the Americans wanted to discuss?
Well, that was actually, interestingly, that was actually after I left Congress.
Oh, I see.
And the Japanese government had invited me to visit Japan on a program that they have, which is a great program, which they bring you over there and they put you up for a week or two, and it's work. I mean, you're not cruising. You're You're working your way right through the system. But that's their interest in getting people in other parts of the world familiar with them. It's a great program. And I think that, and unfortunately in the year that they wanted me to go, I was otherwise involved with a little campaign of a few years ago, so I couldn't quite make it that particular time. So about a year and a half later, I got a call from the Japan Consul General here, and he said, "Do you want to go to Japan still?" And I said, "Consul General, I'd love to go to Japan, but you realize I'm not in Congress anymore." He goes, "No worry."
He has faith that you will be back there or in the Senate.
Either, I don't really know what it was. Anyway, Audrey, my wife, and I went there for 10 or 12 days, and
That's a
and
pretty
they
good
just,
trip.
oh yeah, they ran me right through all the ministries, all of the. It was kind of my program to develop, and I think the only real perk I asked for was that I wanted to, go to a ryokan for a real one.
A
which I'd
real
never
one.
been.
Oh,
They
that's
put me
nice.
They put me up on one, which was beautiful.
Were
But-
you in Tokyo the whole time,
No,
or
no.
different parts of the country?
No, we went from, we did spend time in Tokyo, but we went to Hiroshima, and we went to, I'm trying to remember, Nagoya, a couple of other places. But for what I wanted out of that program, really the action was Tokyo. And so they just ran me through the ministries there for days. And
That's
I
good.
talked to all kinds of folks. Okinawa was a big issue. U.S. commitment to Japan was a big issue. We talked about tourism because I was taking it from a Hawaii-specific perspective too.
I see.
We talked a little bit about demographics because we all know that Japan is kind of the future of many countries' demographics with an incredibly low birth rate and an incredibly high average age of their citizens, creating all kinds of stress on their domestic economy. So I was trying to figure out how are they handling it, which was not
That's a
particularly.
big Northeast Asia problem. As you said, it's not limited to Japan.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people. Well, it's not just it's an industrialized countries problem is what it really is. Because if you everybody has this image of Asia just producing babies galore, and you've got like one of these demographic curves, population dynamic curves, and of course that's not Asia today. They have very low birth rates,
Right.
almost lower in some cases than Europe, which has the lowest in the world, and so they have tremendous domestic social problems that we're just starting to see in this country. So I wanted to take a little bit of an advanced look on that. It was a great trip. Very much appreciate them doing that.
Did you investigate the Japanese national health program at all while you were there, a national pension
I
program?
did somewhat. I did somewhat. I didn't focus on it. I did take a look at the Japanese national health program in conjunction some years ago, in conjunction with the basic question, which is why do we spend so much money on healthcare in this country and
the
not get
return so
not
low?
get the result? Yeah.
Yeah.
And, Japan spends, as I recall, 50% of its gross, 50% of what we spend out of our gross domestic product on healthcare, and yet they have some of the best. They do have some of the best
Right.
healthcare in the world.
Right.
So, some of the longest, life expectancies, et cetera, et cetera. So, I have to confess to you that I never found an answer
Yeah.
as to why. I found an answer as to why it works for them.
Why is that? What's that?
I think that they tend to, well, first of all, they do, at least generally speaking, as a comparison to our country, they do tend to live a little bit healthier to start with. So that's always a good place to start. I think that they have a better primary care system than we have. It's easier to get to a doctor for primary care, and they have more doctors that are available for primary care, whereas we have a primary care shortage in this country, and not particularly a shortage countrywide, at least in some of the specialties. So I think that it's living a little healthier. They have a nationalized healthcare system,
Right.
socialized
Right.
healthcare system,
Right.
which they're all bought into. So they've got a number of the ingredients together, and they've been doing it for decades, so they're comfortable with it.
Moving to the west here, what's your take on South Korea? Another important U.S. ally.
Absolutely. I guess I'm not quite sure what in terms of the issue. I mean, I think South Korea has been an amazing country over the last couple of decades, and has really been a success, and in some cases has the same kind of internal choices that some of the other countries that we talked about have too. They've got a growing demographic problem. They've been built on a growth economy and an export-driven economy too. They have a very high standard of living now.
Very comfortable
One
place.
of the you've got best infrastructure in the world. I went to Korea. My wife and I went to Korea a couple of years ago and traveled around. Amazing country. Obviously, they have North Korea right there, which has not been resolved in any way, shape, or form. So I think that there are major issues for us. I'm really happy that the free trade agreement with South Korea
I was just going to ask you that.
was approved. I supported that when I was in Congress, and I think that direction is a good direction for us to take. So, South Korea has a little bit of the same issues that Japan has in terms of making democracy work, I guess, to put it that way. Been a little shaky in terms of leadership over the last decades, but I don't have
true in Japan. It kind of makes you wonder, about democracy sometimes, because Japan has been sort of not really, as you said earlier, not really moving very much in the last 2 decades when it comes right down to it.
Well, when you've built an economic marvel on growth, and all of a sudden the growth tends to flatten out, it creates tremendous political problems, because then everybody hunkers down into bunker mentality and protect my turf mentality, because they're dealing with a contracting pie.
Right.
So then you have to deal with the agricultural subsidy lobby, and the provincial government payout lobby, and all of the other things.
Those are really good points. And my view is the Japanese government has spoiled farmers for so long. It's just, the Japanese...
Well, we've done a pretty good job of that too.
Well, we've done that too. Okay, fair enough.
But there's been a really good development that a lot of people don't know about in Japan. They've been closing off their market to our papaya for a long time, and we of course make the best papaya in the world. But Japan has its barriers up. It's a very, as you know, very protectionist country from the domestic market perspective, and they don't mind free trade going one way, but they mind free trade going the other way. And
I know exactly what you mean. They argue for free trade when it benefits them and fight against them when they might have to pay the price.
In all honesty, we all do that to some extent. But they've been having this food quality barrier to our papaya for years, and I worked on that when I was in Congress, trying to break that down. And they actually just raise that bar, so now we can send our papaya there.
Do you find this to be a sort of I won't say pan-Asian problem, but a Northeast Asian problem? We had similar issues with beef exports to Korea, beef exports to Taiwan, and this has also impacted the export of some other agricultural products. There seemed to be this, sort of, how should I say, lack of desire to believe that these imports from the U.S. meet a high health standard.
Well, I don't think it has. I was on the House Agriculture Committee when I was in Congress, and we were dealing with.
Did you volunteer to be on that? Was that something you were just purely appointed to?
No, I asked for it. I represented Hawaii's agricultural districts.
The congressional second district.
Second congressional, which is all of Hawaii other than the core of urban Honolulu.
Okay.
I used to joke that I had all the agriculture in Hawaii except for the watercress farm at Pearl City. That was the only thing I didn't do. Other than that, I had it all, man. And so I think that the real concern there was beef exports into Japan. And in all honesty, I never ever bought that it had and too much to do with food safety at all. It was a protectionism. Excuse. Yeah. And so, Did
you feel the same way in the case of Korea and Taiwan, who really fought against U.S. beef imports?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's why I am a supporter of multilateral trade agreements, of fair trade agreements.
So. Well, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to just bring it out here for the record. You said you were glad that the Korean-U.S. FTA got passed. What was your take on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a big piece of what President Obama wanted to achieve at APEC?
I support that. I think that's the right track. I think, although it's a little scary and it's a little, every country that deals in tariff reductions and opening up their borders to relatively unrestricted trade has the same basic challenge to deal with the economic dislocation that it causes within the country in some industries. But the deal itself, in the big picture and the long run, I believe is just the only way to go. And I go back to China for a second, because I really think the answer on China is to engage China in the multilateral trade entities so that it does start to see both the benefits and the obligations of working with the rest of the world on commonly accepted rules in terms of trade, currency, labor, copyright protection, all the things that they're really not doing right now. If that can be offered so that it really is fundamentally the only way to trade in the world, then we're all going to be the better for it, I think.
Okay. Okay, we know you spent time in Australia working on what do they call it? A station,
Sheep
as
station,
opposed to
right.
a farm or a ranch. And
Now, you can't call it a farm or a ranch. You get tossed. You get tossed out of the truck.
And you weren't a jackaroo, right? But you were what was that other?
Well, I was a jackaroo.
You were
I was a
apprentice
jackaroo.
jackaroo?
I was an apprentice jackaroo. I wasn't there long enough to get anywhere close to actually earning the title jackaroo. But a jackaroo is a cowboy.
Okay.
The sheep station that I was on was 40,000 acres, as I recall, and that was small. I remember it was 5 miles from the mailbox to where I actually lived. There were 20,000 sheep and 2,000 cattle, and that was worked by 4 jackaroos, 4 of us.
That was literally the Australian outback.
Technically, no.
No?
The outback, it was in a part of Australia called the Riverina, which is in southwestern New South Wales. So if you kind of draw a line between Sydney and Melbourne, that you'll get down into the Riverina. Very flat, very dry, very hot, but you'd have to go about another 500 miles to the west before you legitimately could start calling yourself the Outback.
Okay, okay. So
yeah,
we just fell a bit short of that.
We
Okay.
fell a bit short, but it was an incredible experience. I went there when I was 18 years old, and I grew up there.
Experiences like that, I think, are really good for people to have. It makes them so they're away from home. They really have to sort of grow up, and they get a. And I think being in another country makes you understand your own country a lot better. Okay, well, we know that President Obama, he was in town for APEC, and then he went on to Australia and Indonesia as well. But in Australia, he announced, along with the Australian government, that there will be the stationing of U.S. Marines in northern Australia. And this number will start off small, around 250, but could go up as high as 2,500. They're not going to actually be stationed. They're going to be rotating through there. What's your take on that?
I think it was a very tangible demonstration of our commitment to Asia. So you can't really talk. You can stand up in a nice media setting and brag about how we're going to engage in Asia, but frankly, from an Asian perspective, from the countries there, it's like, okay, here's another president saying something again. Let's show me the money.
Yeah.
Show me that you are committed here in your trade relationships, in your military participation in our country, and in your willingness to invest with us in a better Asia-Pacific region. So I thought that was appropriate, especially for a country like Australia, which is crucial to us going out into the next generation.
Of course, if I play the role of a Chinese official here from the foreign ministry, or certainly from the PLA, they would say, well, it's just the U.S., the imperialists, trying to rev up a new Cold War. They're trying to contain us. How would you respond to that?
We're honoring our obligations to our friends.
Okay. Okay.
And that's what we are going to do, and we will discuss with you how we can make for a more peaceful world in the Asia-Pacific region, including the resolution of many outstanding disputes, starting with North Korea, the Spratly Islands, South China Sea, Taiwan, go right down the list.
Well,
We are
Asian
gonna
problems
engage
are
with
for
you.
Asians to solve, not you Americans. You're intruders.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that. Frankly, I don't think that anybody in this world today, this interrelated world, can kind of say that hands off to the rest of the world in our part of the world. That doesn't work. We're too interrelated. There's too much at stake for us to carve up the world into various colonial spheres. We kind of tried that, and it didn't work too well.
I think China fails to realize that there's countries in Southeast Asia where it would like to exert more influence, have their own colonial experiences, and are not exactly anxious to bring back any kind of memory of those.
Well, as a matter of fact, again, I spoke to this earlier. You go to Vietnam, for example. Anybody that goes to Vietnam and talks with the folks there, the assumption that we make here in this country is that somehow there's a close and inextricable bond between China and Vietnam, and of course that's not the history of those two countries going back a long time to start with,
No, not
like
at all.
thousands of years to start
Not at
with.
all.
But these countries, like Vietnam, like Malaysia, like Thailand, Myanmar, are concerned about succumbing to falling under the control of China, and so they're looking for a balance that will allow them to work and coexist in a place where really nobody is able to kind of get ahead of anybody else, and everybody can get along together with each other pretty peacefully.
This whole situation that the United States is dealing with now, it really demands a new kind of U.S. leadership, doesn't it? I mean, we want to maintain our position in Asia. And I think it's probably fair to say that American policy in Asia has worked pretty well. But it demands a new leadership style. We're sort of in the middle in a way. Yes, these countries want our security protection, but yet they want to be chummy with China for economic benefits. And we have to be very careful how we play our cards here, I think.
what I said earlier. We both have to be very careful. We all have to be very careful. But if we are careful and do it right, I have great optimism for the future of the Asia-Pacific region, which is going to be good for our world, good for our country, and good for Hawaii. If we all play our cards wrong and get weird about it, it'll be a tough generation. I don't think that we're going to, I hope that I'm right, that we're not going to make that mistake, that we will make the right decisions. But, one of the things that we in our country have to realize from that perspective is these countries are going to interact with China. They're not going to say to China, oh, well, the U.S. is our friend, and so therefore, because you're not part of our club, we're not going to talk to you.
Right.
That is not going to work. They are going to interact economically. They have to interact socially. They have to interact militarily. They have to resolve disputes, as grown-ups. And so we can't sit in Washington, D.C. and say, well, because Australia and China are doing business together, that bothers us, and we're going to, throw a hissy fit about it.
Well, that's the counter-argument. No, it's not a new Cold War, because in the Cold War, these countries were sort of had very little connection, if any, with China. And now, as you suggested, their connections are much deeper.
And they're going to get deeper. They're going to get deeper. And we want them to get deeper.
Right.
We want to have ties between these countries where the alternative of not having the ties and having disputes is not acceptable for a whole range of reasons. That's what we want. And so we can't. And I think that does take new leadership, to some extent, new thinking, although I'm not going to call it that, because we've been thinking along these lines for a couple of decades now. But if you compare it, for example, to 40, 50 years ago, when we were, obviously dealing in a different world with a different approach to U.S. foreign policy,
Right.
where we were far more singly dominant in the world than we are today. We can't apply that kind of, my way or the highway style.
Yeah, right. I understand exactly what you mean. Oh, we got about 5 minutes left here, and so much that we could talk about. Let's talk about Taiwan. Some in D.C. feel that the U.S. should distance itself from Taiwan. What's your take?
I don't think we should distance ourselves from Taiwan at all. I think, first of all, we do have existing federal laws and commitments to Taiwan that I think are fair commitments. And I think we have to obviously fit Taiwan into a far bigger picture than perhaps we once did. And I think that I have some hope, actually, that Taiwan will work itself out. That, of course, one thing that a lot of folks don't realize is the extent of the connection between Taiwan and China today, economically, and huge numbers of travelers going back and forth, and so there's much more of a tie today than there ever was, even 10 years ago.
No, that's true.
And I think that I'm not sure where it's going to go. I think China obviously views a great risk in conquering Taiwan, and it would be a great risk.
That would be a great risk.
So I'm hopeful that what China has in mind is to let things evolve and weather out the little blips in the cycle, and look at the long wave, or what do you call it, long range perspective.
Some suggest, if the U.S. backed away from Taiwan, then the U.S.-China relationship would be so much better.
I don't buy that.
I don't either, but I want to hear what you had to say.
China. Let's go back to the point I made about values. Okay, so our value there is we did the right thing for you, China, and therefore you're going to be nice to us. I don't buy it at all. I think China would look at it and go, "Wow, they're pretty weak. Let's just go deal, and let's go just do that somewhere else. I mean, this is our time, and that's not going to be good. China doesn't expect us to do that."
Well, that's a really great lead into my next question. The U.S. refused to sell F-16 and Ds to Taiwan, something which the Taiwan government has been pursuing for 5-6 years. Was that a sign of weakness on the Obama administration's behalf?
I don't think
Was that
so.
capitulating to China?
No, I don't think so. Frankly, I don't think that selling those F-16s to China, to Taiwan, whether we did or didn't do it, was going to make a snowball's difference in the big picture. It's not going to make the difference between Taiwan's defense or non-defense. China can take Taiwan anytime it wants. So whether you have the fighters or not.
Yeah.
So obviously they don't want to do it, and we don't want them to do it. So I just, in a way, one of the unfortunate things when you're a country like Taiwan is you're always looking for reinforcement. And we've got other instances of that elsewhere in the world. So when we make a decision that they don't, like for larger purposes, it kind of flips them out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that was, worth flipping out over.
Okay. Well, we're getting down to like our last minute and a half here, and just let me ask this. This might be our last question. What was your observation of the Taiwan lobby while serving in Congress?
Interestingly, I hardly ever interacted with the Taiwan lobby when I was serving in Congress. Of course, I was not on the International Relations Committee or the Appropriations, Foreign Affairs Subcommittee. Those are when you tend to interact with Taiwan a little bit more. I had far more interaction with Taiwan through its offices here.
Is that right?
Because they paid very much attention to staying close to the congressional delegation in Honolulu. I had 95% of my interaction with Taiwan here, and 5%. I don't think they even visited my office in D.C., if I'm not mistaken.
Well, we're down to our last 45 seconds, and maybe we should give you a little more time for this, but we know you're running for the U.S. Senate, and what sort of message would you like to, in that regard, leave our listeners with?
A United States Senator is a national leader. A United States Senator needs to work for his or her state. That's an important part of the job. It's a vital part of the job. So helping Hawaii in Congress is vital. But a U.S. Senator is a national leader, too, and a U.S. Senator is uniquely responsible in our system for foreign policy. So everything we talked about here is part of the job of being a U.S. Senator, charting the right course for our country in the next 25 years.
Thank you very much for joining us. It was a
Thank
great
you.
conversation.